RWBY. This is a series almost as synonymous with my channel as Death Battle itself. Unfortunately, more so than even my original content such as Not Death Battle, my abridged works, and How It Should Have Been. Before we start talking about RWBY related death battles, I think I need to make my stance on the series clear. Not everyone is going to sit through a 2-hour-long video where I spend most of my time rambling with a Scottish man on various topics tangentially related to the actual topic to find my opinions on RWBY. And I think I've got quite a reputation as a RWBY hater amongst the community. However, I want to make it clear, RWBY is not a show that I hate, nor is it a show I even dislike. It is a series that is very special and matters quite a lot to me. I in fact only dislike a single volume of the series. Volumes 1, 2, and 3 are the ones I had the most fun with, yes, and the ones I found myself enjoying the most. But personally, I think Volume 4 gets too much hate, I think Volume 6 is just dull but not bad, Volume 7 is fairly decent, and Volume 8 is simply just too boring and predictable, but not outright bad. Volume 5 is the only one I actively dislike, and lacks many of the scenes and moments to make me consider the other volumes not bad. While I do dislike our 4 protagonists, aside from Weiss, who I don't particularly dislike, the only one that I don't like to any major degree is RWBY, for being an insanely boring protagonist who took 8 volumes to have any development on screen, and has had 3 distinct voices across the series' history, all of which were provided by the same actress somehow. While I do criticize the show a lot, it's not out of a place of spite or anger, but out of a desire to see it improve. When I look at RWBY, I don't see something to loathe and despise and belittle because that's the popular thing to do. I see the equivalent of an old friend who's made some bad choices since I last saw them, but I want to help, and I want to improve, to get better. RWBY has allowed me to meet so many wonderful people, just as many as Death Battle has, and while the RWBY community has ostracized me, constantly berated me, and treated me like shit, the people that I met who were rational and actually old enough to be given unsupervised time on the internet have stayed good friends with me since the series' inception. I caught Death Battle on Boba Fett vs Samus Aran's initial airing, but I didn't get super into it until much later down Season 1. With RWBY, however, I've been with the show since the Red trailer first dropped, and I just kept going. It's a show that matters so much to me that seeing it on Death Battle, another show that means a lot to me, should make me really happy. But it rarely does, because I know the inevitability of what my fans and viewers expect from me. And while I love discussing Death Battle with people all the time and expressing how I feel about matchups, characters, scaling, and episodes, RWBY is a series that from my experience I rarely have fun talking about for any lengthy period of time with people who aren't extremely close friends of mine. The kind of friends who know me for who I am as a person and not just as a YouTuber with nearly 7,000 subscribers, what the fuck? Let me guess, it's outdated now, huh? It's one thing to make a RWBY video, but to have to spend 2 weeks in the versus debating community when the newest topic is RWBY and everything about RWBY makes me simply uncomfortable to talk about, it's not an ideal waiting period for me. It is a waiting period that will inevitably remind me of days I would rather forget. It is not the fault of RWBY necessarily, but a fault of the part of the fandom that is just agony. I constantly tiptoe around the RWBY community, but now I have to tiptoe around the versus community as well, just to avoid them until the next topics are brought up. Now that you have an idea of my stance on RWBY, a show that I love to no end but I'm not terribly fond of the current state of yet don't actively hate, let's talk about some death battles. I'm not bringing out DBXs or 1 minute melees, both the RWBY DBX 1 minute melees suck balls, but just death battles. RWBY has had 3 death battles up until now. The controversial one, the one that made me first start doing proper predictions, and the one that I spent 5 minutes in a 2-hour video talking about in spite of it being said video's topic. Let's go.
We've got to have money.
Yang vs Tifa is a shining example both of how Death Battle can do episodes even if a character only has 1 or 2 seasons of content to talk about, and also of why they probably shouldn't. Yang vs Tifa is not an episode I have too high an opinion of. Starting with the analysis, I've always found something off about Yang's. It just feels weird. There is so much gushing from Boomstick about the world of RWBY, and it's hard to explain because, yeah, he gushes about worlds every now and again, but it's so intense this time. Part of my concerns about Yang's analysis, I will admit, however, comes from a difficulty for me to segregate my personal knowledge of RWBY with my normal outlook of judging the episode solely on the information provided. As such, I noticed things such as how they say she was trained by Crow, even though there was no confirmation as of that point whether that was true or not, and by this time we know that that is wrong, and she was actually trained by Tai Yang. It was a fan theory, and it made it into the episode, and the fact that they had contact with Rooster Teeth and Rooster Teeth didn't tell them to change that almost makes it seem like Rooster Teeth didn't know. There's also something weird about how the first 2 minutes of the episode focuses a lot on the world of Remnant and not really Yang. They bring up the fact that every weapon is a gun and also ridiculous 3 separate times before talking about Yang's, which is weird because with Tifa, They don't bring up the weird things about her team, like the fact that it includes a talking dog, a man whose arm is a variable slew of guns, a guy with a sword 5 times his size, a lady with a shuriken as big as a table, whatever case it is, and a bloke who not only has guns but also turns into various different demons just because he can and is literally laced with chaos energy in his very cells. I feel like if you're going to talk about what's weirder, a sniper scythe, gun rapier, and rifle spear are less weird than a man who turns into demons and this thing. They also really weirdly downplay Neo's beating of Yang. Yang hadn't got any sleep that night. But she did. Literally, they show her talking, then they fade and everyone else has gone to sleep, and the only reason she was not asleep at the time was because she was on watch. The idea that the entire time RWBY was on watch, they just kept talking even though they were clearly done talking and didn't get to sleep is absurd. Especially since earlier in said episode she shows signs of fatigue, but after this she shows no signs of fatigue at all, meaning she most likely did get some actual rest. It's just worded in such a way as to be like she has this shortcoming but it's not so bad. But once again, this is all because I know RWBY. There could be a ton more examples I don't know about because I'm not as knowledgeable on the series, so it's hard to judge the episode poorly for that, giving us something you need to know certain things about to understand. Though it is a flaw in the episode that they explicitly worded Yang's weakness in a way that makes it not even sound like one. Good job. But honestly, I just don't find the analysis fun to watch. I didn't mind the idea that Boomstick was actively not mentioning Tifa's iconic chest-mounted organic Star Wars ion cannons until the end, but that's about it, because he still brings them up a lot, and it's painful. The things they say about Tifa that are good amount to, I wouldn't fight her, and damn, check on those tits. I also don't like that Boomstick talks about how Ember Celica's got an amazing sound to it when it's literally just an altered Halo shotgun sound. In universe, it makes sense for Boomstick to love a shotgun sound, but out of universe, they are praising Rooster Teeth for stealing a sound effect from another series. The fight, however, ooh. Let me get out of the way. This is something I've fought for a long time but never had a chance to talk about. I don't see it brought up often either. In my opinion, this fight is fucking ugly. And it's not like other Season 2 fights where they haven't aged super well aesthetically, no. I've always thought this episode looked fucking weird. The models exude this cheapness to them that I can't explain, and it's not something that most other episodes of the season have. Most of the episodes of the season look maybe a little cheap, but fine. Things like Yang's hair and Tifa's, what are they called, coattails? I don't know, are just flapping about as solid singular slabs like they were animated by whoever does NetherRealm's Injustice capes. Yang has this strange black outline around her, but it's not like an outline of her body with another outline of her hair, you know, something that makes her silhouette a bit more visible with the hair taking up most of the background behind her punches. No. It is her entire on-screen silhouette that is given an outline, and it leads to stuff like this at the start, where one of Yang's arms has the outline, but the other one doesn't because the outline is around her hair, except for this part near the elbow, which is beyond the hairline of the silhouette. It's really distracting to me. Tifa has it too, but it's not nearly as noticeable because she's already wearing all black. Their faces also look really strange at points, less so with Yang, who for the most part looks fine, but Tifa? Ugh. And I don't want anybody to say, that's just emulating how Poser looks, because I don't know about you, but these two Yang models and these two aesthetics look noticeably different. Not to mention Tifa just stands out completely with a far more realistic model compared to Yang. And you know what, poor Torian the bouncer here, he was just trying to stop an underage girl from going into a bar. He did nothing wrong. He didn't even try to find her, he just said, hey, can I see some ID to make sure you're, of legal age to enter this establishment? He gets fucking demolished for it. Like, I know Yang is abrasive, but she's not this stupid. Yes, she did punch into Junior's bar, and yes, she did walk in and ask for a drink, but you want to know something? Those two events happened at separate occasions. In the first one, she just walked in, because she could, there was no bouncer for some reason to make sure she was of legal age, and then she beat everyone up, but between that, she asked for the drink. Here, she just breaks her way through. What? Oh, and the ice models, they just look weird. This thing Yang picks up, that looks stupid. The fucking counter is hollow, it looks like an unfinished model. Fucking Yang semblance activating literally is just her hair while completely stiff and defying gravity as if she hasn't washed it for 5 years, changing colors between frames as she's getting up. That is so lazy. The hair and clothing are in the middle of having seizures the entire fight. They look so weird, flickering all about. I'm aware this is the same style as Pokemon vs Digimon, but for some reason it doesn't bother me in that one. I think it's for multiple reasons. The models aren't as weird in Pokemon vs Digimon, and the lack of long hair and clothing means there's not as much that's flapping about in the fight. The episode does have its weird moments, like Agumon getting up after Mega Charizard claps him, it just looks wrong, and Red's sudden black eye mask, and Mega Charizard suddenly looking like he just got Terry Power Waved after being stabbed once, but I don't find myself reeling back thinking that's ugly nearly as often for that episode. And it's a shame because the choreography on display here is great. The fist fighting is super fluid and well animated, and there are several references to the yellow trailer and the Tifa's fight with Loz that are great. There's also some genuinely good moments. I love Tifa blitzing the hell out of Yang, and when she does all of her limit breaks in a go. I like that Yang just bodies the giant chunk of ice with a single punch. I like the idea of Yang shattering the premium heart before her win, but it's just not enough for me. I find the episode too unpleasant to look at, and not just that, but I feel it's weird that Yang smack-talking Tifa after her semblance is activated and she's supposed to be in a blind fury. That's not very Volume 2 Yang at all. Combine that with a lackluster death that doesn't really make much sense given the two shotgun blasts would cancel each other out and not produce a neck snapping motion, and you've got a boring climax. Boy, it also wasn't a good idea to play Yang's theme song lifted directly from RWBY for this episode in the entire second half of the fight. Gee, I wonder who's going to win. And then right after the battle is over, we get the fucking Volume 3 teaser, which is one of the sleaziest things I've ever seen them do. Ryu vs Jin going to the Vault of Haven was weird and unfitting. The No Matter Nowhere cameo was random and annoying. But this is just sleazy and greasy. I don't like saying that, but that's how it feels. Think about this episode for a moment. You've got Yang. She's one of the most popular characters from this show, RWBY, which you have directly interacted with the creators of, and you are currently partnering with the company of for this episode. It has its next volume, which has been highly requested and anticipated for an entire year, finally announced and coming soon. She's got her official voice actress. She's got her theme song playing in the fight. She's having boomstick gush all over the world she's from, as well as her throughout the entire analysis. You have her body a character who solos her entire verse on her own. The battle is animated by a man whose greatest inspiration was the creator of RWBY. And you have the fight, the part that's one of the biggest draws of Death Battle, end with a goddamn motherfucking advertisement for the next volume of RWBY. This is one of the sleaziest, greasiest feeling parts of any Death Battle, and while I'm not going to accuse anyone in the production for this, it just feels wrong. And you know, it's not great, honestly, that the end of the video, the next time is another advertisement for a different show. This is straight up a reverse Mewtwo vs Shadow. Instead of being made to shit all over a character with no regard for his opponent, this was made to hype one up at the expense of her opponent in a way that feels purely like an advertisement. In spite of that, I don't think it's all bad. As I said, I think the fight is well choreographed, it's extremely fast paced and is a lot of fun on its own. But that can't save this episode from what it feels like, a blatant RWBY advertisement. And you know what? That fucking conclusion. Ignore the stats themselves for a moment. I know that's controversial, but ignore that. It has this little gem. Listen to this.
Plus, while Tifa could lift creatures many times heavier than Cloud using her limit breaks, she never shows this kind of strength anywhere else, implying that this power is exclusive to those limit breaks rather than something she possesses naturally.
Okay, so, the reason you're not looking into the power of her limit breaks is because they do not scale to her base power. Alright, what the fuck? This is the equivalent of not looking into how strong any of Goku's Super Saiyan forms are because his base does not scale. Or, you know what? Not looking into how strong his Kamehameha wave is because it's canonically considered significantly more powerful than his physical strength. This is like not looking into how powerful Link's Master Sword is just because his base strength isn't comparable. It's one of the stupidest arguments I've ever seen, especially because if anything, it helps Tifa. It means her base strength would not be amping up Yang enough for Yang to outclass her limit break strength, which would put Yang down once activated. This would mean that Yang is going to be amped up by Tifa's base strength hitting her, until the limit breaks come out, which Yang will not have the ability to deal with. How the fuck do you mess up an episode this badly? Fucking 3 out of 10. Fuck this episode. Yang deserved better. Yang is a character who deserves way better than this. Tifa is a character who deserves way better than this. Torian is an animator who deserves for his animation to be in a better episode than this. RWBY is a show that deserves to be in a better episode than this. So let's see a better episode than this right now. Weiss vs Mitsuru is such a strange bag for me. Weiss is pretty well my favourite member of Team RWBY. Blake is dreadfully boring, Yang is a roller coaster of uncertain characterization, and RWBY is RWBY. So out of all the episodes, this is the one I'd want to be the best, and, well, let's start with the analysis. To me, this is where the episode shines. Weiss vs Mitsuru has, to my recollection, the best cutaway gags. There's one with the bookshelf, which is funny enough, but there's one in particular I remember. It's the explosion chart, which is just a really funny gag, because it manages 3 distinct jokes in succession with good pacing, and they're all funny. You got classic Boomstick being Boomstick, and then he's defending himself and the dropping of Wiz being an unethical bastard without outright calling attention to that specific part of Boomstick's rant, then the payoff with the coat, and that final little bit of Boomstick push up his glasses. That's funny shit. And what's great is that this comes back in the conclusion where you see they're wearing the coats again, and they're not even bringing attention to it, but this means Wiz hasn't realized that the coats are made of the interns, and Boomstick has made more than one coat. That is just fucking great. This is a really solid analysis. It had its laughs, it has good coverage of the characters, it's just good overall. A monumental step up from the last episode we talked about. There's no underlying bias that can be noticed just from the way they talk. Then there's the fight, and honestly, not too big a fan. There are things I quite like about it. Aside from the first line and the Ice Queen line, which felt out of character and really awkward, all things considered, Kara Eberly does as expected a fantastic job with Weiss, and Corey Petit also does a great job with Mitsuru. Hopefully I got those names right. I've never known how to pronounce Kara's last name. Maybe it's even pronounced Kara. No, that'd be awkward. The starting sword clash is one of my favorite parts of the fight. I love myself a good weapon trail, and this fight has it even when RWBY doesn't. I wish RWBY had weapon trails sometimes. This looks great to me. Additionally, while I find it kinda jarring given I'm so used to RWBY style of animation, Weiss's face is significantly more expressive in this episode than in the actual show. And her glyphs are given this honestly really nice glow to them that I wish the actual series had. It's a bit weird to me. It's not a downside though. I can't criticize the episode for having better animation than RWBY. I also really like the moment right before the death where Mitsuru straight up tells Weiss to get fucked. There's just something strangely cool about the way Mitsuru says, strong enough, and then blows her own brains out and resummons Artemisia and is just fine. And you know, I like the fact that Weiss still tries to fight even while she's holding her arm, even if I'm unsure what caused her to be hurt specifically there. And I guess I like Winter Sonata. It's not a terribly interesting track for me, but I think it sounds nice. Aside from that though, I don't have much positive to say about Weiss vs Mitsuru. Let's start simple. I think Weiss has a bad model. It's not nearly as bad as Yang's. In fact, I think this whole fight has a much better aesthetic than Yang vs Tifa. But Weiss's model just doesn't look right to me. The lighting feels weird, the eyes are covered in eyeliner which looks super strange, and I think above all, she's the wrong color. I know Weiss hasn't been white since volume 1, 2, and 3, but I kinda just saw that as her development away from her family being symbolized by the way she dresses. She was white like her sister and father in the first 3 volumes, then in volume 4 she turned to a more bluish grey hue as she started to turn away from them, then in volume 7 she went full blue and was no longer shackled by her family. Here, however, this is what Weiss is supposed to look like, and this is what she does look like. It is very noticeably a lot more blue in the death battle as opposed to this color, this sort of bluish grey. And I can't avoid it. It's something I'd love to brush off as a nitpick, but that would imply a character's 3D model, which you have to watch for almost every shot of the fight, is not important enough to be warranting criticism, which is a stupid way to think and doesn't help anyone. Then there's the fact that the fight gets super slow after Artemisia shows up. The sword fighting, all 2 times it happens in the fight, is really nice, but Artemisia just brings things to a crawl because she's slower than both Mitsuru and Weiss in the fight, and her attacks feel really sluggish. The ice from Weiss also looks uncomfortably realistic in texture. It's weird and looks out of place. Not to mention when Mitsuru stops it, there are these 2 shots back to back and the ice just disappears, which is lazy. Then there's also the Ice Queen line, which I know some people like because
I know what that is!
But this just feels weird coming from Weiss. Weiss taunting in the middle of a fight against someone she doesn't know personally, it just feels out of character to me. And the whole, so that's what it feels like one of those, oh, isn't that so quirky moments. But here we are at this moment, Mitsuru and Artemisia versus Weiss and the Queen Lancer. This should be a cool summon versus summon fight, right? Nope. Literally, all that happens is that Artemisia throws the Queen Lancer slow enough for a stalactite to grow on the ground. Weiss and Mitsuru also have this awful moment. Now sure, this is a recreation of a motherfucking Monty scene, but that one is so fast and fluent, while this one is slow as hell. And you know what, it's not just Weiss, it's Mitsuru. The more I watch, the more I realize that, Weiss is, doing traditional squash and stretch. She's using more frames to build up anticipation and fewer frames to actually show the motion. But Mitsuru is moving at a consistent upwards pace. Now yes, Weiss is also moving too slow, her motion should be sudden, swift and fast, and she should be delivering these strikes in rapid succession, and she's not, but it doesn't help that Mitsuru doesn't look like she's being hit by something that's super fast. She looks like she's just being whacked a little softly. It looks silly and bad and I hate it so much. Weiss catches Mitsuru and then throws her so slowly that Mitsuru has time to observe the wind erosion of an ancient monolith before she actually gets launched. But all of that would be fine normally because of this. This is the big moment the fight should have focused on. Weiss and the Armagigas versus Mitsuru and Artemisia. And this shot is great. Seeing the two separate fights happening simultaneously at the same time is so cool. But then almost immediately the two summons go off screen and Weiss gets janked to fuck. Then the Gigas dies because Weiss was too stupid to move slightly off to the left with her glyphs. Legitimately, the Armor Gigas throws one single attack on screen and only lasts 27 seconds between when it's summoned and when it gets impaled. The Armor Giga spends less time on screen than the fucking Elon Musk joke from Geese vs Heihachi. Unless you want to count the extra like 7 seconds it spent summoning, which... Actually no, that would still be 3 seconds shorter than the Elon Musk joke, and that's not counting the Kazuya stuff at the earlier parts of that cutaway gag. This fight should have been the highlight of the episode. Imagine an extensively choreographed battle between the summons and their masters. You got them both separately fighting, and you've got the two duos working together. The win should have come from Mitsuru and Artemisia's better teamwork and experience, as opposed to Weiss just being a fucking moron who doesn't know Team 4-star memes. And the Armor Gigas deserves to throw more than one goddamn attack on screen as well. Then there's a time dilation stab, which is unintentionally hilarious. The idea is solid, but the fact that the music cuts and Mitsuru is just doing this face where there's no blood or even a visible wound, and it looks more like Weiss did a Mario 64 clipping glitch through her is hilarious. She's just like, huh, that's rude, my Milky! Also, Weiss's aura breaking just reminds me of how inconsistent RWBY is. Volume 1 to 3, when the aura shows up, that means it's broken. Volume 4 to 6, when the aura puffs outward, that means it's broken. Volume 7 to 8, the aura turns to dust and dissipates, that means it's broken. Good job, guys. Then there's the death, which is by far one of the worst in the show's history. Artemisia ices Weiss up, Mitsuru stabs Weiss in the stomach, and Weiss is launched off screen. Yup. Not even a corpse, not even a Cloud Strife face plant. The ice shatters and it's weak as fuck. The death scream is bad, and all we see is Weiss's weapon breaking, which... okay. Legitimately, it didn't even need to be super gory. All they needed was to show Weiss's body falling onto the floor, and that's it. The only defense I've seen for this is that it's a reference to Mitsuru's instant kill, which has kill in the name. I like that it's a reference, sure, but also if this is the reason they didn't show the body, that means Death Battle were assuming information the viewer has, which they should never do. If someone doesn't know that, then, well, it doesn't fucking matter what it's called, does it? And even then, most people know it as her astral finish, not her instant kill. It's a shit defense. Also, am I the only one who finds Weiss's ending clip weird? Instead of a traditional ending clip, it's like this montage of various shots with music and then a random line from her out of nowhere.
One shadow at a time.
This appears to be just the beginning.
With the RWBY team at her back, I think she's found the family she truly belongs to.
I'm more than a name.
And that's Weiss vs Mitsuru. A boring, slow, disappointing animation with very few moments that stuck with me, held up by a good track and a great analysis. Now this animation, despite all the flaws I brought up, I would probably give a 5 or a 6 out of 10 overall, because the brief sword clashes, the effects on Weiss's glyphs, and the voice acting are all really good. It's a bit unbalanced to the speed of the fight being so fucking slow and the absurd amount of missed potential, and just generally being super boring, which is a major disappointment to me given this is Weiss's episode. However, that analysis is just so enjoyable and well written, and has the best cutaway gags, 2 of them even. I'm giving this episode a 7 out of 10, because that analysis is just that good. Think of it like if Batgirl vs Spider-Gwen's animation was subpar as opposed to a raw transcription of unrelenting agony into video form with no effort.
Are those 2 sets of ears? She must have 4 times the hearing.
Blake vs Mikasa didn't exactly give the best impression during the waiting period. The 1-frame preview we got was not the best shot and looked like a random in-between, the previews themselves were chock-a-block with unfunny and stupid jokes, and the sneak peek I legitimately thought was unfinished animation. Then, the episode came out, and as it turns out, Thunder Shroud is a really good track. This might be my favorite of the season. I can't stop listening to this fucking track. This must be what it feels like to be Biff with Lost Ice Storms. Oh yeah, the episode wasn't great. I mean, literally the first thing you see is them misspelling Blake's fucking name. Come on, guys, she's your own fucking character! But the analysis is painfully unfunny. Blake has this joke about racism and like, I know more than one person who is a minority and doesn't particularly like how RWBY handled racism, and as someone who technically is a minority and has a history with racial discrimination in the past, I also don't like how RWBY handled racism. They handled it with all the subtlety of a neon green and orange railgun launching Alvin and the Chipmunks, but the film has been dubbed entirely by a pitch-shifted Nicolas Cage. As such, it's not exactly something I can find myself particularly excited to think about, let alone for a joke and one with all the nuance of that railgun if it was aimed at Racism HQ. And there are just some other things that bother me, because technically they're not right. They say aura is passive, but Ren says this.
Your body isn't used to this kind of training. Not to mention generating a defensive aura on your own. It takes intense concentration at first, but in time it will become second nature, allowing you to deflect attacks and gradually heal your wounds. After that, you can begin focusing on your semblance.
So it's not like Blake's aura is always active and passive, but I also get, what it means is that once she activates it, it's just constantly on. She doesn't have to constantly turn it on to defend, but it's not something that's on from the start. They say the Nevermore is 289 meters tall, and how? This is the shot they go with, and as you can see, this little black line is Weiss, and this red line is probably what they measure for the Nevermore, more or less. I just don't get how that's 289 meters tall. In fact, for reference, here is it shown up close with Yang and RWBY, and it's not far off when you compare how tall Weiss is to its mouth here. And keep in mind that according to them, this thing is more than 2 times larger than the 2014 Godzilla. Based on how large Yang is within the Nevermore's mouth, she'd be this fucking big. That is not right. Even when they show it, you can literally see other members of Team RWBY in the shot there. Why would you not? I know the Nevermore fluctuates a bit in size. Why not measure how big it is in the shot where it does the feat that you're looking at? I don't get it. Blake herself was standing right on top of the Nevermore, and Weiss was also hanging on the Nevermore. How is this 290 meters long? Did nobody think it was weird when you have all these other shots showing characters needing to be pretty massive in proportion to the Nevermore here? It's almost like nobody gave a shit about Blake. Oh. Okay, no, that's fair then. Nobody gave a shit. I mean, I wouldn't. I mean, it doesn't really matter anyway, because they get Adam's moon slice to 4 tons, but at the same time, that's kind of a disappointingly small number for such an impressive looking feat, but also, that was Adam absorbing a dust laser and throwing it back, which he didn't against Blake or Yang, and even against Blake and Yang was one shot earlier in the series when he was powered by only one small blast from Gamble's Shroud, and later on, she only managed to block it with a metal arm the second time, and this is the only attack that's ever damaged that metal arm, but fuck it, let's just go with it. There are higher feats for RWBY anyway. The thing with Blake is that she has no feats. Like, what are you gonna fucking calc for Blake's individual feats? Dodging the sea Fei Long speed feat, I guess, but that's not literal lightning, or I guess the time she cut the back of a train? Blake hasn't done much. Also, they say, not so bad for a bootleg Virgil. I mean, I guess not when you've put Adam 23.25 times more powerful than you put Virgil. Mikasa's analysis, meanwhile, is kind of just overshadowed by a single moment. One single fucking moment. That fucking fart cutaway. This is the first episode of the season without a boomstick dad joke, and you know what? There's a little clap for that. But this feels like the one time I would have wanted one, because a dad joke often lasts like one line. This fart joke is 10 seconds of Chad James going, stinky poo poo funny. It's painful. I literally hurt my back when I was watching it. I'm not joking. My back hurt. Aside from that, all I have to say is that it feels weird how they outright spoiled... spoilers for Attack on Titan. Skip here if you're an anime-only watcher or if you haven't caught up with the manga. They spoil the fact that Eren becomes the main villain and that Mikasa kills him in the end. That feels a bit weird. People were saying, well, I mean, it makes sense to use Mikasa before Eren, because with Eren you've got to spoil a bunch. They just spoiled the fucking manga in the episode, and I don't know, that feels weird. They did, admittedly, credit to them, they did put up a disclaimer. I mean, not everyone reads the little corner things, but they did put it up on screen. So they get props for that. Now let's get to the fight, which... There's one problem, and you can probably guess what I'm about to say. It's the fucking frame rate. Look, I guess some people might like it, but it's just ugly to me. It's slow, choppy, it looks bad. It still doesn't look as bad as Yang vs. Tifa, but I have the same problem with All Might vs. Might Guy. But while that episode had everything else to back it up as a great episode, this one doesn't. And you know, don't bother trying to argue. I've heard all the arguments before. It's trying to emulate anime. I don't know if you noticed, but 3D anime like Land of the Lustrous and Garo Carved Seal of Flames aren't animated like this. The only time you see 3D animation like this is when you get series like Genlock trying to emulate anime. What a strange phenomenon. How is it that when we attempt to emulate anime, we do it in a way that looks different to anime? I mean, I guess there was also the Godzilla trilogy, which did have this animation, but that is not the trilogy you want to look at for inspiration for anything except maybe good effects. The other argument I've heard is, it reminds me of Dragon Ball FighterZ, and Dragon Ball FighterZ looks good. And yeah, but the difference is that Dragon Ball FighterZ knows how to animate on 2s. That being the frame rate they're going for. When you're animating on 2s, it means each individual image is on screen for 2 frames, as opposed to 1 frame like most Western animation, including RWBY. The thing is that FighterZ makes heavy use of smears and really dynamic pose changes. Each frame is drastically different from the last, and often covered with a smear to add the illusion of that extra frame most animations would have that they don't. This episode doesn't do that. The other argument is that it's emulating Attack on Titan's animation. I don't know how to fucking tell you this, but Attack on Titan is a 2D hand-drawn anime. This is a 3D animation. Why would you try to emulate 2D in 3D in this way? It's a poor choice from the start. 2D and 3D are explicitly different, with different strengths to each. Why would you try to emulate one with the other? Imagine we got Link vs Cloud 2, but in 3D, but it was animated like a 2D sprite battle, with a single angle for most of the fight, and with a strange fascination on adding in hand-drawn moments because it's trying to emulate sprite animation, because Link originates in sprites. Would people still defend that? Probably. But they shouldn't. Regardless, I don't fucking like it. I think it looks choppy and outright ugly. There are weird moments like how the frame rate does fluctuate for some reason and it's jarring, and their hair is almost always animated on ones, which is strange because it means their hair is always moving at a different frame rate to their body. And I know that there's some fucker who's gonna say I'm either too critical or nitpicking. Nitpicking? If you think I'm nitpicking, then what the fuck does that word even mean to you? A nitpick should refer to a criticism that is generally irrelevant or small, like that spelling error I brought up at the start for a laugh. To say the frame rate issue I have is a nitpick is implying that a major component of the core foundation of the entire animation is not important enough to warrant criticism. What the fuck is that argument? The frame rate is so fundamental to animation that it would be like saying the animation is not relevant enough to the animation to criticize. And if you think I'm being too critical, too bad. I'm not here to voice your opinion or talk about how other people felt. I'm not going to sugarcoat or lie about how I felt. I watched it, the frame rate bothered me. I wasn't thinking when I first watched it, no, critically I think there are these major issues. No, this wasn't something I thought long and hard about. It was something that the moment I saw it, I didn't like. And if you really need me to tell you that you're allowed to have your opinion, and that you don't need Big Daddy Nemesis to validate how you feel, then I don't know what to say. You can feel free to enjoy this episode and the frame rate, but instead of coming to me with arguments I've already heard and disagree with, just say I don't mind it. You're allowed to like what you like, I'm allowed to like what I like. Anyway, so the writing then. The writing's not great either, and from what I can tell, this is kind of a compromise that had to be made because they couldn't get Aaron in to voice Blake for whatever reason. Now, most likely she was either busy with Volume 9, or she was asking too much money, or it might have been something to do with COVID or other family-related issues that, you know, I don't think they're allowed or want to get an impressionist of one of their own characters. That's not a good look. They probably should have delayed it if they could, but then, you know, there's a lot of things going behind the scenes I don't know. They might not have been able to, or they probably just wanted to keep it, like, you know, when Attack on Titan's ending was new, you know, relevant, and RWBY had just finished Volume 8, so as relevant as they could get it. But yeah, that's just unfortunate. It sucks to happen, but regardless, because of that, the fight starts with a slightly out-of-character Mikasa screaming at Blake and aggressively demanding her to get down, even though Mikasa wouldn't do that unless Eren was in trouble, and an even more out-of-character Blake ignores her. What? Look, I know Blake has this image to her, but she's not this kind of character. Volume 1 Blake would have walked away. Volume 4 Blake would have ran away while irrationally screaming that Mikasa is wrong and there's nothing to be concerned about. And Volume 8 Blake, the one this model is of, would have just offered to help and made sure Yang was okay while she was at it. In no world would Blake ignore her completely and go back to reading her book when Mikasa is screaming about evacuation and clearly concerned about this. If this was a picture of Yang, then I could totally buy it, but it's not, it's a book. And overall, Blake comes off as a real villain in this episode. Mikasa destroys her book while trying to tell her to leave for her own safety, clearly not aware of how strong Blake is, and Blake decides to kill her over it. Blake actively kills someone over a book and for trying to help her. There's also this lovely shot where Mikasa tries to pull her gear, but Blake has decided that only after she's seen it fire, kill her book, gotten to her feet, and stopped Mikasa from pulling it, now she will look shocked. Why? And they recycle 2 lines for Blake, and the "Leave me alone" from Volume 6 just doesn't fit and sounds really bad. Oh yeah, and Mikasa drops this gem.
Are those 2 sets of ears? She must have 4 times the hearing.
Now, ignoring that I don't think hearing increases by that measurement and that I think 2 ears is less for hearing amplification and more for being able to locate where sounds are coming from, the logic of she has 2 sets of ears, ergo 4 times the hearing, as opposed to she has 2 sets of ears, ergo 2 times the hearing, just baffles me. Is Mikasa secretly a fucking moron? If Blake had 4 times the hearing by this kind of metric, she would have 8 fucking ears. You know, 4 times the amount she has. Not 4 times 1. Why? What? Mikasa does, however, actively use some tactics in this fight, and the fact that Blake is very much an aggressor here while Mikasa is given the spotlight, with all the lines as well as constantly being in her head, makes her come off as the protagonist. This is added to by how most of the fight Mikasa spends on the back foot, constantly getting smacked around, getting off almost no hits on Blake due to Blake's semblance, and getting bodied through a building. This legitimately plays out like Mikasa's going to get bodied all fight, then come through at the end with a win like a real protagonist in a shonen anime would. So when she dies, all because she tried to save someone from being killed by titans, it kinda comes off as rather tragic. But yeah, Mikasa does take some time to think about the clones and reads Blake well enough to get a hit on her with the Thunder Spears, which I do appreciate. I think that was a really nice thing. But also, the fight does end up playing out like Mikasa getting bodied the whole time, getting a couple great moments at the end, and then immediately dying afterwards. However, I do like some shots, namely when they're swinging around. Those usually look really good. And you know what? That's one of the main things I wanted. So you get big ticks for that. You pulled off one of the biggest things I wanted from the fight. And you know, the choreography is quite good. There are some sword fight moments that look good, but the frame rate does kind of hinder it. And while there are some good shots, there are also some really bad ones. This Mikasa run. Are we sure they're trying to replicate Attack on Titan and not RWBY? Because this is a dead ringer for the infamous Cinder Roof run. This might actually look worse, because it's closer up. There's also this lovely moment of Mikasa being lip-synced wrong that was neat. I'll also say that while some of the swing looks great, there are moments where the two remain almost entirely on one spot on screen, and it's just the background scrolling, and I get what they were going for, but it looks kind of weird, and it's the frame rate. If this was moving at a smoother speed, it would have looked great to me. Despite all that, most of this fight was a blank slate to me, with a few moments where I went, I like that, and a few moments where I went, ooh, I don't like that. But then the ending happens. It starts off where we get the payoff to all of Mikasa's internal monologues, except for the ear thing. That never gets brought up again. It's just weird. Mikasa throws a Thunder Spear, it fucking smacks Blake across the face and her aura goes. Then we get this legitimately really good shot. Both are reduced to silhouettes as Mikasa severs Blake's arm. Her weapon, hair, and blood are the only things colored, while Mikasa's swords are the only things colored. About all I would change in this is making so the swords were not so close to shade to the backgrounds, they're a little bit clearer. Just a little bit, but regardless, I think this is the best shot of the episode. I think this looks really good. I don't know why the blood remains purple when Blake falls. I mean, I get it's a callback to Adam's moon slice on Yang, but it looks really weird here when it's all fluid. Like when Yang gets her arm cut, the blood is all like weird and glowy and stuff and flying into the air and not acting like blood. While with Blake, it's just acting like purple ooze. The idea for the kill is really cool. Blake uses her dust to freeze Mikasa's leg, adding weight that Mikasa wasn't prepared for and causing the Thunder Spear to misfire into the wrong direction. Blake catches it and throws it with Gamble Shroud, using her weapon to pull the pin and detonate the spear to kill Mikasa. But in execution, we have the second character being stabbed in the titty with no blood or wound, make it look like it just clipped into her moment in this review. Though this time the face is more akin to, "That was my favourite tit, you monster!" However, the death is fucking hilarious. I legitimately had trouble keeping down when I first watched this to try and not wake up my family at night, because that death screen combined with the way she vomits the explosion just looks and sounds fucking hilarious. It's just, God, it's so funny. Not to mention that Blake gets like yeeted by the explosion at the end. After that, Blake gets up and is oddly chipper. What? Like, Blake has this massive fucking smile on her face, like she's proud of the murder she's just committed, and she screams incoming to nobody with the most chipper tune, almost as if she doesn't fucking notice that her arm is missing. Who do you think you are, Sanji, losing an entire fucking limb and not giving a shit? I mean, you know, at least Blake went, ugh, when it initially happened. Sanji didn't even do that. Like, what the fuck? Why is she so happy? She's just murdered someone, she's lost her aura and her arm, and she's just come across this giant naked man thing she's never seen before that clearly isn't a Grimm. Blake kills a mass murderer who attempted to bomb a school, is a blatant racist, and has tried to horribly injure her and her friends multiple times, and it has a serious mental effect on her. Blake kills this random she's never seen before who was trying to get her out of here, and she outright sees the reason for why she was trying to get her out of here to evacuate, and she smiles about it. This is more how I'd expect Yang or RWBY to act. What the fuck? Why is Blake so happy? Rooster Teeth, why do you have such a bad understanding of your own character? How did they portray Blake both as a serious edgelord who never listens to people pleading to them, and also as a carefree gibbon who doesn't care about serious maiming or murder, and seems to enjoy the idea of fighting a bunch of monsters when heavily weakened? She's just so happy to have lost her arm and murdered someone. And then the conclusion is fine. So what did I think of Blake vs. Mikasa overall? Well, clearly I didn't fucking like it. I thought the animation looked bad, the writing sucked, it lacks many memorable moments except for that, and overall the only thing I liked about the episode was the track, because I really liked Thunder Shroud. Like, I don't know how I like Thunder Shroud so much, but I do. But yeah, 4 out of 10 episode to me. The low point of the season so far, despite how some people might think I feel about Lex vs. Doom, that was blank nothingness to me, and this one was actively unpleasant to watch at points. And you know what? That doesn't make me happy. In fact, let's look at all 3 of these episodes for a moment. RWBY is my second favourite web series of all time and one of the most important shows to me generally, but so far their track record with Death Battle is one that just doesn't please me. I get some people, the absolute RWBY fanatics, are just happy to see RWBY on Death Battle and RWBY winning and like... fine, I guess, but you know, who wins the Death Battle doesn't usually affect my enjoyment of the episode. I'm not watching this to see RWBY win or lose, and I think just saying, oh, this is good because RWBY wins, is fucking stupid. I'm watching this to get a good overall experience, and the only one of these episodes to pull that off was Weiss vs. Mitsuru. And while I'm not going to complain about how my favourite member of the team had my favourite episode so far, especially because she died in it, I'm not happy that the other 2 episodes have disappointed me so much. I should love these episodes, but I don't. And look, I'm sorry if that's not what you wanted to hear, but too bad, that's not how I wanted to feel either. I've been Nemesis Bloodreich, and please, make RWBY vs. Marker good. That's all I want, a solid 7 or 8. And you know what, while you're at it, get John on the show. That boy needs his chance.